So, dear SUSNANO colleagues, I'd like to welcome you back to my second part of my presentation on Module 2, Horizon Europe Project Lifecycle, Initiation Phase and Planning Phase. So, in the first part, I'd covered Initiation Phase. Now, this second part will be covering the planning phase very much from the perspective of Horizon Europe projects. So how does that look in terms of the agenda? So looking at the lower part of my screen here. So in planning phase, we're going to talk about standard application forms. We're going to talk, and I should add, because in essence, the planning phase is really about proposal preparation, writing the proposal. And therefore, and out of the proposal, there's a part A and a part B. The part B is the narrative part. It's arguably the where the most of the work is involved. And therefore, I'm going to be talking about how to draft the part B in terms of its section 1, scientific excellence, section 2, impact, section 3, implementation. I'll then go on to talk in some detail about resource allocation, costs, budget, in other words, personnel, financial, and so forth. I'll say some words about how you actually submit a proposal, some brief comments about how proposal evaluation, what that entails. And then if you're fortunate enough to be selected for funding, you go into what is called grant agreement preparation. I'll say some words about that. And closely tied with that, there is a consortium agreement is required if you're running one of these projects. So I'm going to say some words about that. Now, all the time as I'm going through these different parts of the planning phase, I'll be drawing upon personal experience with Horizon Europe projects and its predecessor, Horizon 2020. So I'll be showing you examples of parts of successful proposals and figures and text. Okay. So yeah, as I mentioned a moment ago, that the planning phase is really mainly concerned with proposal writing, as you will see. Okay. Standard application forms. So it's a busy slide I've got here. In essence, this is showing two different types of standard application form. On the left-hand side, it's the cover of the document, the guide, if you are applying for Horizon Europe Research and Innovation Actions or Innovation Actions. In essence, it's the same application form, same guide. The QR code to download, and by the way, this is a PDF document, this guide. The PDF can be downloaded by clicking on the QR code in the top left-hand corner. On the right-hand side, this shows you the cover for the standard application form for Horizon Europe Coordination and Support Actions, CSA. Now, the PDF document for that can be downloaded using the QR code in the top right-hand corner. Now, a word of warning with both these documents, from time to time, the Commission updates, makes changes to the application form, makes changes to the requirements. And it's vital that you have the latest version of these documents. So anytime you are about to start writing a proposal, be it RIA, IA, or CSA, don't simply grab the standard application form that you might have had from 1 year ago, or even 6 months ago, because there's every possibility that there's been an update. Okay, so moving on. Well, before we move on, what you might just notice on both of these covers, below the sort of title where it says standard application form, you see some text where it says application form part A, and then below that project proposal technical description part B. So I'd like to elaborate on what those are all about. So look, the Part A typically gets referred to as the administrative information. So this Part A of your proposal, it's generated by the European Commission's IT system. It's created through the European Commission's funding and tenders portal submission system. But when I say it's created, that's based on data that you as the proposal writer, you have to, and your participants, you have to enter in to the online portal. So the kind of information, the kind of content that needs to be put in would be general information about the proposal, such as the title, acronym, abstract, and duration. But there'll also be details of participating organizations and the consortium partners, in other words, including their legal names, contact information, and roles within the project. There'll also be some information about their capacity or experience of past projects or what publications relevant to the proposal that they have. Also in this Part A, part of the content that has to be entered in, there are a number of declarations and ethical considerations. You have to ensure compliance with eligibility criteria and ethical standards. And then I've highlighted it here in bold, budgetary information. So the estimated costs for each of the partners that will be entered into this online to the portal to create the Part A. Now, because most of this stuff in the Part A is fairly standard, except for, say, the budgetary part. Later on in this presentation, I'm going to talk in depth about budgetary issues, but otherwise, I'm going to focus very much instead on the Part B. So the Part B is this technical description. It forms the narrative component. The Part B is a detailed narrative that addresses the core aspects of the proposal. It's structured to align with evaluation criteria. The Part B is written typically in, say, Microsoft Word. When it's finalized, it's converted into a PDF document, which the proposal coordinator, she or he, will have to upload to the portal, to the European Commission's funding and tenders portal. Now, in this Part B, briefly, I'll only say it briefly now because I'm going to go into much more detail in the following slides, but this Part B has these three main sections. So section 1, excellence, where you have to describe clearly your objectives, relevance to the work program, the soundness of the proposed research methodology. There's a section 2, impact, called, where you have to describe the expected outcomes, dissemination strategies, and potential societal or economic benefits. And then there's a section 3, implementation, where you have to give information about the work plan details, including work packages, timelines, and management structures. So let's now, before we go into each of those sections of the Part B, I want to say some words now about how to structure your Part B proposal, and specifically how to structure the section 1, the excellence, in relation to the section 3, the implementation. So this is a very busy slide, a lot of boxes, a lot of bright yellow stars. What I'm trying to convey here is, if you focus on these columns, so there's like a sort of column with a series of pink blocks, and then there's a column with sort of light blue blocks. The column on the left, at the top, it says excellence. So this is referring to the excellence section of your Part B. There's a subsection called objectives. Now, what I say to people who give training, what I aim to do myself, is I tell people that whatever your overall objective is with your research project, or even your coordination support action, have some overarching high-level objective, but then break it down into a series of sub-objectives. And if it's research and innovation action, so describe it in terms of scientific and technological sub-objectives. 1, 2, 3, 4. Usually I tell people don't have more than 5, yeah? And these sub-objectives, they should be in a rough chronological order for your project. Now, for each of those objectives, what I then say is, look, make sure each one maps to its relevant work package. So you describe these sub-objectives, how, and they should all be sort of state-of-the-art, beyond state-of-the-art, and then how you do it, the tasks that are required to actually achieve those objectives. They will be each described in their own respective work package. So, and that's what you see with the blue column. So look, that's kind of the high-level view. In practice, how does it work when you're trying to do a proposal? So let's now look at the yellow stars, starting with number 1 on the right. So during initial discussions, I find in the sort of proposal preparation stage, when I'm with this initial critical mass of consortium partners, I start by getting them to sort of sketch out, you know, what they think the objectives are, what they think the work packages are. And this may be, and I tell them to sort of put it in a rough chronological order. And this process is quite often iterative. You know, maybe the first set of objectives they come up with, there needs to be a bit of further subdivision or exchange of tasks between them. But anyway, that's the first stage. During those discussions, it usually also becomes clear, because often partners, ex-scientists, they often start by sort of saying, look, well, this is what my university is good at. This is what we got. We got these facilities. We got these postdocs, these PhDs. This is our expertise. In essence, what they're saying is that they're kind of positioning themselves for a role as a work package leader. And this is great. This is fine. This is what you want to hear. So during those discussions with the partners, work out what these work packages are and their corresponding objectives, work out who the natural, obvious work package leader is for each of those. So I've discussed at 1, 2, even sort of 3, so yeah, repeating, make sure these objectives and work packages are roughly in a chronological order. Then, and this is sort of perhaps getting a bit later onto some, we'll be talking about in other slides. When it comes to sort of writing the proposal, whoever's the respective work package leader for work package 1 or 2, whatever, I tell that person, look, produce maybe a page of text of the work package description. Oh, and then I also need a page where you're describing the objective in terms of state of the art, going beyond state of the art. Yeah. What else? So I kind of covered point 4, point 5. Oh, this last point 6. So here I'm saying, look, there's, with all these proposals, there'll typically be a work package set aside for dissemination, exploitation, and communication. That's great. And then obviously a work package for project management. Now, oftentimes, consortia, they'll put the work package for project management right at the very start. I tell them put it at the end, simply because that then allows you to have this nice mapping between the scientific and technological objective number and its respective work package number. So, you know, 1 maps to 1, 2 maps to 2, and so on. If you put project management right at the start, that messes up that simple mapping. So that was talking about it, structuring work packages, objectives between sections 1 and 3, maybe in a somewhat abstract way. Let me give you here a concrete example. This is from a project I had under Horizon 2020. It was called Phoebe. It was about the development of organic light-emitting diodes, different types. And at the end of the project, we created a number of lighting panels which were tested. So you see, we had 5 scientific and technological objectives. These were the sort of titles. And then on the right-hand side, you see the work package titles. So if you sort of read the objective and the respective work package, you see there's a very close mapping. You know, scientific and technological objective 1, it's basically about theoretical modeling. Lo and behold, work package 1 is called modeling. Similarly, scientific and technological objective 2 is all about synthesizing these OLED compounds. And that maps the work package 2 synthesis, yeah? So it's all very intuitively structured, clear, hopefully easier for the evaluator to read the proposal. So look, that's some words about overall structure. Let's now move on and talk section by section. So section 1, section 2, section 3. Now for section 1, I've got some 7 slides I'm going to cover. And in a way, it's a bit of repetition. What I'm saying here with this particular slide is, look, whoever's your work package leader, work package 1, she or he, you'll be asking them to write the text between half a page, 1 page. It depends on the particular page constraints you have. But that person should be writing the scientific and technological objective 1. Similar story for a scientific and technological objective 2, 3, 4. Also in this section 1, and what I'm sort of showing here is that there's a bit near the top of the slide where it says section 1 objectives and ambition, and then in italics it says briefly describe the objectives of your proposed work, why are they pertinent to the work program topic. So look, just to explain to you on this slide and several of the forthcoming slides, this italicized, this text in italics, this has come from the guide, the standard application form. This is like what the Commission is saying. This is some of the requirements that you are supposed to cover in section 1.1 of your proposal. Now, and with that said, below on the lower part of the screen, you see this table and this bright yellow star. So look, in order to address this particular requirement, the classic thing that proposal writers do is they create a simple table with 2 columns. The example I'm showing here was from a Horizon 2020 project I had called SIP is Home. It was written in response to a call way back in 2020, building blocks for resilience in evolving ICT systems. So what we did was in the left-hand column, we copied and pasted some of the important requirements from the call text. We put those in the left-hand side, left-hand column, and in the right-hand column, we wrote briefly, concisely, look, this is how our proposal is addressing that particular requirement. So this is a classic thing that the proposal writers do, and I would recommend. Of course, sorry, just to go back, of course, with some proposals like coordination support actions, CSAs, the overall page constraint for the Part B can be quite a challenge. It may be only sort of 30 pages. If that's the case, what I do is to save as much on space. In the right-hand column, instead of writing a bit of text, I might just say, look, see section 2.2 or section 1.3 or whatever, or a specific page or part of the proposal where I feel we're addressing a particular requirement from the call text. Now, also in section 1.1, the Commission tells us under this heading, objectives and ambition, they require us to describe how your project goes beyond the state of the art and the extent the proposed work is ambitious. Well, we already described a moment ago about breaking down this overall scientific project into a series of scientific and technical sub-objectives, where each work package leader describes the state of the art. Of course, we're addressing that there. But another really good thing to do, which I recommend if you're doing a proposal for, say, a research and innovation action or an innovation action, and that is to have some sort of high-level quantitative indicators for your projects. So in concrete terms, this is an example you see here. This was a project I had called Mnemosina. It was all about the development of computation in memory. It was a project funded on Horizon 2020. Now, in their case, with their projects, at this high level, they could demonstrate that they were going beyond the state, or that they were aiming to go beyond the state of the art for these specific indicators. So they said that with the technology that was going to be developed, the aim was to improve the energy delay product by a factor of 100 times to 1,000 times, that they would improve the computation efficiency by a factor of 10 times to 100 times, and that they would improve the performance density by a factor of 10 to 100 times. Now, that's how they were aiming to demonstrate going beyond the state of the art with their particular technology. Of course, if you're developing a sensor, some other technology, you need to think carefully, what are the key indicators of performance? What am I trying to improve upon? What's the current sort of benchmarks, state of the art, and what do I hope to achieve by the end of the project? And try to summarize that in some sort of table in this section 1.1. Now, also in section 1.1, under objectives and ambition, you're asked to describe where the proposed work is positioned in terms of research and innovation maturity. Now, here on the right, this is a table showing technology readiness levels. This was also for this project proposal called Mnemosina, dealing with computation in memory. Now, I talked at length about the definitions of TRL levels in the earlier presentation about initiation phase. Here with this specific proposal, Mnemosina, we had a requirement. It was rather exceptional that in the call text, it only expected us to do developments between TRL level 2 and TRL level 3. So, okay, we made sure we described how during the course of the project, or how we would aim to verify that we were achieving this. But we went the extra step. We wanted to show that, look, we're not only interested in this project just for the 3 years, this research and innovation action. We got a vision of how the technology would need to be developed beyond the project. So we also did our best to speculate and think what would need to be done, how could we verify technology development beyond the project. And that's what you see with TRL levels 4, 5. I don't show it all, but we went all the way down to sort of technology readiness level 8, 9. This is something you should think about doing. Still in this section about scientific excellence, but now we're in section 1.2, methodology. So here the Commission wants us to describe and explain the overall methodology, including the concepts, models, and assumptions that underpin your work. Now, what you're seeing here, this is a figure that I had from my Phoebe project, the one dealing with organic light emitting diodes for lighting panels. So what I did was in just trying to describe the methodology. I have a background in the past of working on product development in the automotive industry and medical technology sector. And there, rather like with project management, where we have initiation phase, planning phase, there's also heavy usage term phases, breaking down projects into technology development phases. So I took the liberty to look at our Phoebe project and identified main phases, and then I gave them titles, and then I showed where the work packages aligned with those phases. And one of the things that became pretty clear was shown far more clearly with a figure was that the work packages 1, 2, 3, they worked very closely together and they worked in an iterative fashion. So that was something that we could nicely demonstrate in this methodology section through sort of graphic means. Of course, I didn't only rely on a figure, there was also some text describing some more aspects of methodology for different work packages. Still in this section 1.2 methodology, the Commission says they ask us to describe any national or international research and innovation activities whose results will feed into the project and how that link will be established. So here with this table that you see on the slide, this was from a project proposal I did for what's called an ERA chair. So an ERA chair is a scheme under the widening program which provides generous funding of up to about €2.5 million to, in essence, fund a professorial position and a research group at a university or public research institute in a widening country. Now, in this case, it was an ERA chair professorial position dedicated to maritime cybersecurity at Taltech University in Estonia. When I came to work on this proposal, what became abundantly clear was they had many recently passed or currently running projects in related fields in cybersecurity and maritime. So, and to illustrate this and how this could be somehow beneficial for the ERA chair, we created a simple table like this. First column, we showed these different projects or initiatives when they were running. I should add this proposal was written probably in about in 2019. So the project started around about 2020. So here it is, shows the duration, and then we said very concisely, look, what's the link for this ERA chair proposal that we're writing. This is for this example for an ERA chair. You could imagine, even if you're doing research and innovation action, if you've got examples from across your consortium partners of projects, initiatives, and how they could be beneficial, summarizing the table is probably a quite effective way to do that. Then lastly, on the section 1, scientific excellence. So still in the section 1.2 methodology, the Commission says explain how expertise and methods from different disciplines will be brought together and integrated in pursuit of your objectives. Now here I'm illustrating two examples. The one on the left, this was a simple figure. This was from Horizon 2020, Marie Sklodowska-Curie action called RISE, Research and Innovation Secondment Exchanges. So I wrote the proposal. We had a project called MEGA, also dealing with organic light emitting diodes or the materials for those. In that case, we could broadly just categorize these three different disciplines, experts. So in that case, we had organic material producers, organic material scientists, organic electronic device manufacturers. So it was an excuse to get a nice little simple figure and then write some text to elaborate. With that scheme, it's all about mobility and exchanges. Using that figure as a kind of lens, describe briefly these different groups and elaborate on the exchanges that were going on, and in that way we could demonstrate the different disciplines that were involved. On the right hand side, this is again from this Mnemosina proposal project dealing with computation in memory. Here the principal investigator came up with this nice sort of figure sort of summarizing the different disciplines, different technologies and expertise, and not only having had this figure, but then sort of elaborated with some text to explain it. I always find I think evaluators in general appreciate it when you do introduce not an exhaustive number of figures, but a certain number of figures. It helps to break up the text. It helps to clarify, hopefully make it easier to understand and digest different aspects of your proposal. Okay. So now we move on to section 2, the impact section of the part B. I've again got 7 slides. This section is broken down into a number of subsections. We start with section 2.1, projects pathways towards impact. So the Commission asks of this section, it requires us to describe unique contribution of project results towards one, topic outcomes, and two, wider impacts. Here, this figure and this text you see here is again from Nemosina. One of the outcomes we were told that we would need to help contribute towards was and you read the text where it says 2.1.2. We had this particular outcome the Commission was requiring of us. It said help to double economic value of semiconductor component production in Europe within 10 years. So in this case, what was really helpful was in the consortium, we had some very strong industrial partners. ARM was in there, IBM was a partner, amongst others. Certainly in the case of ARM, they had some access to some very nice market research reports about the semiconductor industry. So we were able to draw upon that, use some of the text there, some of the figures there to help write this section of the proposal. Of course, nowadays I should add, I mean, this proposal was written a fair number of years ago, certainly before the development of generative AI. Now that generative AI is available and has become pretty, by all accounts, very sophisticated, you can consider, for example, using ChatGPT version 4.0, 4.5, something like this, to help you with preparing the text for this kind of section. Still in section 2.1 of impact, the Commission says indicate the scale and significance of the project's contribution to expected outcomes and impacts. Now, not only is it nice to write in qualitative terms about these expected outcomes and impacts, it's also good if you have some quantitative indicators for outcomes. Now, what you see with this table, this is actually part of the table that was used in the SUSNANO proposal. So there was something like 4 or 5 expected outcomes. I'm only showing here, say, the first 2 expected outcomes that were listed. The first one mentioned here was outcome 1, support the economic investment plan and innovation agenda for Western Balkan countries by spurring economic recovery, blah, blah, blah. And then so outcome 2, improved excellence, capacity and resources in Western Balkan countries, enabling to, etc., etc. Now, that's just 2. As I say, there were 4 or 5. For each of those expected outcomes, I then really brainstormed amongst all the different activities we were doing, you know, what potentially contributed to which outcome, and could we put some kind of, not only just define an indicator, but can we also put some kind of target? So that's what you see in effectively the 3rd column and the 4th column. This is something very good to do. As I say, especially this is particularly relevant for coordination support actions, I would say, especially if you're thinking about 20 proposals, era chair proposals, calls under widening. This kind of thing goes down very well. Still in section 2.1, projects pathway towards impact. So the Commission also wants us to describe any requirements and potential barriers. And I'm going to focus on this thing about potential barriers. So underneath that line, you see these 2 figures. There's one that says Strategic Research Agenda 2020, and then the one on the right, European Cybersecurity Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda. Now, look, these are 2 documents that I found very helpful when I was writing that era chair proposal on maritime cybersecurity for Taltech. But the more general point to make is in trying to understand about the potential barriers or the potential challenges for a particular technology in a particular sector, a good place to go and look is for these strategic research agendas. So currently now on Horizon Europe, the Commission has established quite a number of private public partnerships called European partnerships. For example, there's one called Processes for Planet. There are a number of others. I apologize, I don't recall all the different names, but there are these European partnerships. They foster collaboration between private companies and public research. They also have this remit, this responsibility, yes, to define what are the strategic research priorities. In other words, to define a strategic research agenda. And these strategic research agendas, they then inform the priorities for calls for proposals in Horizon Europe. I've been talking quite at length here about strategic research agendas. You're probably asking, why is he saying all this? Because the words underline the potential barriers. Well, the reason why I'm saying all this is because I find typically in these strategic research agendas, in the earlier parts of the document, they'll talk about the challenges faced by a particular technology in Europe in a particular sector. In other words, challenges for me is basically a synonym for potential barrier. So what I'm trying to say is do your best, try to find if there's a European partnership relevant to the field of research you're working on. If there is, look for the strategic research agenda, go through that document, find what it says about challenges. And that's a perfect reference, an excellent reference for you to then write about potential barriers in your proposal. But hey, wait a minute, that's not enough. Even if you found this great document, you found this section about challenges, that's not enough. You also need to write not only that you are aware of these challenges, these barriers, but you have mitigation measures. You've got ideas in mind how your project, how your consortium can overcome them. So don't forget to write also about that. Still on section 2, impacts. So now we move on to subsection 2.2, which is measures to maximize impact. In this section, you need to write about your dissemination, exploitation, and communication plan. Now, I have to be really honest. I always, time and time again, I have to struggle in knowing the difference between dissemination and communication. Somehow exploitation seems to be easier, but the subtle difference, or less subtle difference between dissemination and communication always kind of eludes me. This figure here is a nice figure that's been produced by the European Commission from the European Research Executive Agency. Here it does a nice job of sort of clarifying the meanings of these different terms, when they should be done, how they should be done, who are the target audiences. So I strongly recommend you to look at this slide, familiarize yourself, ideally do a better job than me in remembering the distinction between dissemination and communication. Still on this topic of dissemination, exploitation, and communication. So the Commission requires us in the proposal to provide a first version of the plan for dissemination, communication, and exploitation. And this is an example. This table, very, very concise kind of table, is a very summarized plan in essence. So this is a real example. This is from my Horizon Europe currently running project QRC for ESP. It's a project running under the EIC Pathfinder Open scheme. So with that particular scheme, you have a rather extreme page limit. When we submitted the proposal, we could only have 17 pages for the whole of the Part B. So everything had to be very, very concise, very consolidated. And this is the table that we came up with. So what you're seeing here, first column, it shows what are project results, everything from project website to scientific results. And then we very concisely describe in the second column what's the measure, what's the activity done in terms of dissemination, communication, exploitation. And then after that, we show, well, what are the different target audiences? The Commission wants to see that you're aware that you've got different audiences and who's going to be the recipient for different dissemination, communication, exploitation measures. And then lastly, we have a column where we show the key performance indicators, the KPIs. So this is what we were saying as part of our plan. This is what we're aiming to achieve by the end of the project. Now, in the proposal, I didn't only have this table, I also wrote concisely for these different target audiences, industry, academia. I wrote very concisely and gave some real examples of who we meant by industry, who we meant by academic audience, and so forth. Again, in this section 2.2, but now there's a part where the commission say they request us to outline our strategy to manage intellectual property. So this table, this is a real example. This is from the SUSNANO proposal project that I had on computation in memory. What I do with certainly for research and innovation actions and innovation actions, and even for twinning projects such as SUSNANO, any project where there is going to be some research going on, what I do is I ask the consortium partners to indicate what foreground knowledge they expect to generate. So foreground knowledge is new knowledge, but as opposed to background knowledge, which is knowledge that they already had and they're bringing to the project. Foreground knowledge is the new knowledge they anticipate to generate during the project. So during the proposal preparation stage, I asked all the consulting partners, look, please help fill in this table, indicate what you think will be the foreground knowledge that you would generate, and claim responsibility, but also indicate other partners that you think will have some contributing role in helping to generate that foreground knowledge. Now, doing this goes down very well with the evaluators. They like to see this, that you're thinking already ahead. It's also extremely useful because if you win the project, if you get funding, you're going to basically need this table. You're going to need this information in your consortium agreement where you talk about intellectual property. So, still, last slide about impacts. So there's a section 2.3 summary. The Commission's, certainly for coordination support actions, they say, look, create a canvas showing the key elements of the project's impact, pathways and measures to maximize its impact. So what you're seeing here, this is from a twinning project. This is one that I'm currently running called Quest. It's with the university ELTE. It's a top university in Budapest in Hungary. So with this canvas, you'll see, if you were to look and go into standard application form, you'll see this sort of basic template for this canvas. What I did, again, because of extreme page constraints, I brought, in effect, kind of like two tables together in this canvas, and brought them very, very closely together. And I wrote very, very succinctly, in the case, because it was a twinning project, I described, and I should add these titles where it says specific needs, expected results, dissemination, exploitation, communication measures. These are titles given by the Commission in this template. Likewise, targets, outcomes, impacts, similar story. They're in this template. Now, because it was a twinning, in this table, I basically said, look, in terms of specific needs, ELTE, we've done a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it shows that there's a need to address, with respect to their research and innovation for quantum reservoir computing. Their project on twinning is on the field of quantum reservoir computing. Because I didn't have the space and couldn't elaborate any further here, I just said, look, see section 1.2.1. This is where this SWOT analysis was actually provided. Similarly, I should add, for example, the middle column where it says expected results. I've written here, see key performance indicators of objectives 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in section 1.1.1. That's because I just didn't have the space here to repeat that text here. So Anyway, this kind of table, certainly for twinning, era chair, other winding calls. This is the kind of table I think would be very useful and could be adapted. Okay, so we finally finished section 2. We now move on to section 3, the last section of the part B. So section 3 is all about implementation. One of the first things you're asked to provide is a PERT diagram. So PERT diagram, for those of you who don't know, is a diagram that shows the relationships between the work packages and the tasks. Now, in my case, I have to say, I tend to go for very, very simplistic looking PERT diagrams. I mean, you see this figure you see here, this is from my Horizon Europe QRC for ESP projects. It's currently running. We've got 4 scientific and technological work packages. Those are shown in the middle. Then we've got the standard work package 5 dissemination, communication exploitation, and the standard work package 6 on project management. Now, being completely honest with you, the arrows, the locations of these work packages, it's a rather simplistic view. I mean, the reality is probably the interactions between, say, there's probably interactions between work package 4 and work package 1, but this shows it in terms of its main linkages, main information flows. Yeah, I should add, it's already been said before, whoever's the work package leader, not only will they need to write their text for their respective objective that goes in section 1.1 of the excellence, they're of course going to have to help write the text for their work package description. So this is what I'm showing now on this slide. So this is it doesn't show all, but this is a real example of at least part of a work package description. This was for Horizon 2020 project I had called Hyper OLED. So the things I want to sort of draw your attention to are the following. So look, in these work package descriptions, there's a bit where you have to say what the objectives are, and there's a bit where you have to say what the description of work, where you describe the task. And I've written here, in fact, the lower part says deliverables. In fact, these days with Horizon Europe, you don't put the deliverables in the work package description. It goes into another table elsewhere in section 3. But for the sake of explanation, it's not. It's still useful what I'm going about to explain. So look, when I tell each of the work package leaders, I tell them, look, for each objective that you had within the work package, like objective 3.1, that should map to its own task. Likewise, objective 3.2, that should map to its own task 3.2. What I personally don't like to see is when there's like 2 or 3 objectives and there's not a clear mapping to the relevant task. That really kind of irritates me, and I find it just makes it a little bit harder to sort of read quickly and evaluate to quickly understand, interpret what's going on. Another thing to draw your attention to, if you look at the second yellow star here, it says try to use the imperative verb form, e.g. elucidate, determine. Yeah, so especially if English is not your mother tongue, from years of experience, I've often seen that, and understandably, it's difficult to write well in English. And sometimes some of the titles given for tasks or objectives, they're a bit too verbose, it's a bit too many words, or it's written in a rather passive kind of way. What I like to do is to make sure converts the objectives, the titles of the objectives and the titles for the tasks. In fact, what you'll notice, I basically make the title of the task the same as the objectives. But with those titles, I like to use the imperative form. It just sounds that much more active, like you're an action plan. You're trying to, you want to get going. This is how you're going to do it. Yeah, it's a subtle point. Then regarding deliverables, the key point to remember and be aware of here is make sure you have, however long your work package is running, if it's for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years or however many, make sure that you have that you distribute some deliverables across the work package. It shouldn't be too many, it shouldn't be too few. But if you're, for example, doing a 3-year project and that work packages runs all 3 years, then maybe you would like to make sure that there's a deliverable at the end of each year. Or at the very least, if it's 3 years, there's some deliverable at month 18, halfway, and some deliverable at the end of the project at month 36. Don't fall into the trap of just having a deliverable at the end of the 3 years or the end of the 2 years, because you run the risk of being criticized by the evaluators, by the reviewers, because if you win the project, from their point of view, it becomes how can they assess your progress at the interim, if you don't have some sort of deliverable. So that's some words about deliverables. In section 3.1, you also need to, the Commission says they want a work plan timing. So in other words, they want what's called a Gantt chart. So this is, again, a simple example. I know Gantt charts can be more sophisticated in their appearances, but basically, typically what I do is I prepare this kind of Gantt chart in Microsoft Excel. I show, and this example, this is from this Hyper OLED project proposal I had. In the Excel file, I showed each work package. I showed who's the work package leader. I also showed each of the tasks, task 1.1, 1.2, etc. Who was the leader, who was the support. That's what you see in sort of the left-hand column. On the right-hand side, where you see the blue bars, you see the duration of these different tasks. And also I've superimposed on top of that the dates. They're marked by these red triangles. Those are the deliverables. There might be reports, there might be prototypes or websites, whatever, it depends on the work package. But you see those deliverables. And also I would mark down the milestones. So a project would, of course, it depends on the project, but you could have anywhere between maybe 10, 20 different milestones, typically in a project, say 3 years in duration. So these milestones are also shown in the figure. Looking at the yellow star on the left, it says deliverables and milestones distributed evenly across the project. So yeah, I mentioned that comment for an individual work package, but it applies, of course, for all the work packages, the entire project. Okay, still in section 3.1 on this work plan resources, the Commission requires us to describe the critical risks that your project might encounter. Now, again, on the right you see this table. This is a real example. This is a table that appeared in my QRC for ESP project proposal. So at the same time, I asked each work package leader to write their work package description and to define their deliverables, and also to write the text for describing the scientific and technical objective relevant to their work package. At the same time I was asking all of that, I said to them, look, please also brainstorm. I want you to come up with at least 2 very specific, very concrete risks that might occur for your project. That not only describes that risk very concisely, but also please come up with some sort of risk mitigation measure. Oh, and by the way, when you're talking about this risk, it's not enough just to say this is what it is. I want you to sort of specify what the likelihood of that risk occurring is. It low, medium, high, and also the severity of that risk. So if it happened to occur, would it be disastrous, or would it be of minimal impact? So again, like low, medium, high. If you do this kind of sort of table for any kind of research and innovation action or innovation action, and even, sorry, I should add, you have to do it for coordination support actions. This will go down well. And as I say, make sure that you have at least 2 critical risks for each work package. If you do that, you should be on fairly safe ground. So we now move on to talk about still in section 3.1 about work plan resources, efforts, person months, and budget. So the Commission wants us to write some words to justify, to explain our budget. The classic thing that I do, and I think a lot of proposal writers do, is to come up with some simple pie charts to illustrate how the efforts, in other words, which is the Commission's term for person months. Classic thing to do is come up with a pie chart you see on the left, where you show the number of person months and what that means in terms of percentage-wise for all your different work packages. Then in the middle figure, the middle pie chart, you see I've done a pie chart where I sort of show how many person months and what percentage does that mean, the split between academic partners and private partners. And then the last one, the pie chart on the right, this shows the actual sort of distribution of the budget costs for things like personnel, travel, equipment, and so forth. Now, that's a quick word about those. Let me say some specifics about each of those specific considerations that you think about for each of those pie charts. So, okay, first one, the efforts distribution across the work packages. So, some key things to be aware of here. Whatever your work package is for project management, the number of person months for that should lie somewhere between 5 to 7% of the total number of person months for the whole project. Don't allow it to be too lower than that. So don't go, like 4%. Don't go above 7. So don't have 8, 9%. It's never written anywhere, but somehow it's common knowledge that this is what the evaluators expect to see. Somewhere between 5 and 7. If you do that, you'll be on safe ground. In a similar vein, in this particular project, work package 5, so work package 6 was the one dealing with project management. In this particular project, work package 5 was the one dealing with dissemination, communication, exploitation. Now, again, it's only a general rule, but if you're dealing with a research and innovation action, I would say make sure to keep the person months for this work package below 10% of the total number of person months for your project. That's for research and innovation action and innovation action. On the other hand, if you're doing a coordination support action and you have specific activities like organizing conferences, workshops, this kind of thing, then quite possibly the number of percentage might go above 10%. But if that's the case, make sure you write concisely some words to explain why it's a relatively high allocation resource for that purpose. Yeah. If you do that, you'll then be on safe ground. Then as regards the other work packages, 1, 2, 3, 4, these were scientific and technological work packages. What can I say? It's not a requirement that you have a perfect balance of resource for each of your scientific and technological work packages. They don't all have to be, say, 15% or 20%. That's not a requirement. However, if there are certain work packages, for example, in this case, work package 3, and arguably work package 2, they do have significantly more resource than the other scientific and technological work packages. So if that's the case, make sure you write just a few words to explain why it was necessary. If you do that, you'll be in a good position. Okay, so that's some words about work packages. And then going back to this pie chart in the middle, efforts distribution partners. Now, okay, here, I think where this is really kind of this type of pie chart is particularly important is when you are, say, doing a proposal for a research and innovation action or an innovation action. So if it's a research and innovation action, in simple terms, it's usually okay. It's normally not a problem that a majority of the resource, the person months, are allocated to the academic partners. Of course, as in this particular example you see here, they had over 80%. It's really rather a lot compared to the private partners. If you have this sort of relative extreme case, then make sure you write some words to explain why it was necessary. In this particular case, we argued that the project was dealing a lot with very low TRL levels, TRL level 2 and 3, and therefore this research type activity naturally lent itself to be done by the academic partners. On the other hand, if it was doing a proposal, say, for an innovation action, we got these higher TRL levels, I would expect to see a much fairer share, maybe even quite possibly that the private partners have more person months than the academic partners. Okay. Then the last one there, the budget distribution, this pie chart, what to say there? I think no particular comment. I mean, typically personnel costs take up the vast bulk of costs. If I don't think we have any subcontracting here. If you do ever have subcontracting, and you have to be really careful if it really is subcontracting or not. If you do, this is somehow the evaluators, the commission seem to be somewhat kind of allergic to seeing that. So you have to make sure that it's only a very tiny percentage of your overall budget. And you have to explain very clearly and well justified why it's necessary. Okay. So yeah, I think that's enough for that. But we will be talking more about budget in a moment, so that's not the last word in it. But this last slide about section 3 implementation. So there's a section 3.2 called capacity of participants and consortium as a whole. Now, this whole table that you see here, this is an example, again, from that proposal project I had called Mnemosina. And here what I do is, this goes in the way back to a much earlier slide where I talked about how you structure. I recommend you structure your proposal. You might remember I said, look, so for each scientific and technological objective, it should map to its own work package. Assuming you've done that, here now, this is right at the end of the part B proposal, section 3.2. What I do is I again repeat each of those scientific and technological objectives. That's what you see in column 2. These are the ones we have in that particular proposal. And then I said in the column on the right, very concisely, look, who are the partners chiefly involved in that? The work package leader, maybe the task leader. And then I said very concisely, look, what capabilities, what equipment, what was it about them that meant that they could achieve this objective? They had the necessary resource, be it equipment, people, to try to deal with that. Yeah. So in a way, this is kind of a nice way to conclude your proposal. You know, right at the end, you've got this nice structure with the objectives, and right at the end, you're still sort of fighting your cause. You're still saying why we can do this. Yeah, this is the final word. Okay, so look, I've kind of beaten to death a bit about part B technical description, but we still need to go back and we need to say some words about resource allocation, about budgets, in other words, because this is also an extremely important part of your proposal. Now, perhaps the first thing to mention here is these days with Horizon Europe, there are sort of 2 ways of doing the budget. There's something called lump sum funding, and then there's something called reimbursement of actual costs. So in the past, with Horizon 2020, until the very, very end of the program, everything was, the way you did the budget was all reimbursement of actual costs. I think it was only at the very end of Horizon 2020 they had some pilot calls where they introduced this thing called lump sum funding. However, now that we're in Horizon Europe, increasingly lump sum funding is the way we're required to do the budgets. And this approach of reimbursement of actual costs is becoming less and less. So what's the difference between the two? Well, look, lump sum grants, in a simpler description, they're grants where you define the budget for work package in the grant proposal, and they're fixed in the grant agreement if you win the project. These funds are then triggered upon completion of the activities in work packages. The payment of lump sums follows the usual European Commission payment schedule. In other words, typically you'll get some pre-financing, normally some interim payment, although not always, but certainly some final payment. Reimbursement grants, on the other hand, they're defined according to eligible costs. So there's things like personnel costs, travel costs, equipment costs, etc. Here, the funds are triggered upon submission of financial statements showing actual costs for period one. I mean, your project we've broken down into, typically, if it's a 3-year project, it'll be 2 periods, period 1, period 2. If it's a longer duration, maybe there'll be a period 3 and so forth. Anyway, the funds are triggered upon submission of financial statements showing the actual cost at the end of each period. The payment reimbursement grants then follow the regular EC payment schedule, pre-financing, interim, final payment. But that's not enough of an explanation about each of these different, if you like, funding mechanisms. I'm going to go back now and talk, or before I get into talking about those, I need to talk some more about these different costs, types of costs. So in your project, be it lump sum or reimbursement actual costs, when you're doing your budget together, you'll certainly have personnel costs. They'll almost certainly represent the bulk of your costs in your project. Now, the things to be aware of is, so actual costs, if you're dealing with personnel in a university or company or whatever, the cost that you use, it's the gross. This is if you're doing actual costs. You'll take the gross monthly salary for that person, but you'll also add into that the employer's contributions to Social Security and pension. On the other hand, some organizations, some larger public research organizations, for example, I believe certain Fraunhofer institutions take this approach. They use what are called unit costs. So these are used by beneficiaries who calculate average rates for their staff as part of their analytical cost accounting system. You then also have a special case with SME, small to medium-sized owners. Sometimes you have situations where the SME owner, they don't pay themselves a salary, they pay themselves dividends. In this case, there is a formula that the Commission provides. You have to use a standard monthly rate of 5,080 euros and then multiply it by a country-specific coefficient. So you'd have to go away and look up the Commission's tables for this country coefficient. I mean, in the case of Germany, just as an example, the coefficient is 98.3%. So this standard monthly rate will be slightly less than 5,080 euros. Some words about subcontracting costs. So firstly, double check to see if the cost is really a subcontracting cost or actually rather a purchase cost. As an example, in the past, way back in the FP7 framework program, anytime we needed to get audit certificates on financial statements, the cost for getting an accounting company or auditing company to produce that certificate, the Commission told us and required us to define that as being a subcontracting cost. However, when we came to Horizon 2020, and this became a bit of a headache at times, with the reporting. However, when we moved to Horizon 2020, the Commission recategorized those costs. They no longer said they're subcontracting, but they said they're a purchase cost. So I give this example just as an example to say, look, don't automatically assume that a certain cost is subcontracting. You have to really check, investigate carefully to see if that's the case. If, with all that said, indeed you have some contracting costs, my general piece of advice is keep them below 5% of your total direct costs. And whatever subcontracting costs you have, make sure that you document them in this table 3.1G that is within the standard application form. Make sure you write some comments justifying why you have a subcontracting cost. We'll then move on to talk a bit about purchase costs. So there are several different types of purchase costs. The obvious ones are travel and subsistence and equipment, but there are also things like other goods, works and services and other remaining purchase costs. Now, before diving into those, the thing you need to be aware of is if the total value of your purchase costs in your proposal are below 15% of the value of your total personnel costs, then you don't need to provide a cost breakdown justification in the table 3.1H. This table 3.1H is a table that you'll see in the standard application form. But if you're below 15%, if a partner has purchase costs below 15% of their total personnel cost, then they don't need to do it. So only if they exceed that, then they have to provide this breakdown. If you have exceeded the 15%, then yes, go through what are the different items you have. If, for example, you have travel and subsistence costs, you need to give some kind of breakdown. Here I give an example from the twinning proposal, such as SUSNANO. Here, because in this particular, with these twinning projects, as the name suggests, it involves a lot of twinning, a lot of exchanges between partners. As a consequence, we had quite substantial travel budgets. They represented quite a large part of the overall budget of the project. And what you need to think and understand is the more money you're allocating for something, the more you're going to have to justify it. So in the case of our travel, these twinning projects, we really had to drill down and say, explain how we calculated the budget. I mean, we talked about how many person months of training exchanges were going to be, how many different early stage researchers or experienced researchers were going to be making trips. We'd say how much per DM they were going to be allocated, how long typically their trips would be, how much for a flight, and. This was the level of detail that we were basically required to do for twinning. If you're doing a research and innovation action or innovation action, where the travel costs have a much smaller percentage representation of the overall cost, you don't need to go to this level of detail. It's probably enough just to say, look, here's so much budget for typically so many researchers to go to so many consulting meetings per year, to go to so many conferences per year. Yeah, that would probably be enough. Okay, enough about travel and subsistence. Some word about equipment. So look, the key thing, if you, in your budget, you plan to buy equipment, the thing to understand is it's not the costs, it's not like the price of the equipment that you can simply book. What is an eligible cost, what you can book and claim grant money for, is the actual depreciation of equipment. Now, I haven't written any more than that sort of statement on this slide. It's my bad. What I should add is that when it comes to depreciation of, say, laboratory equipment, it really varies from one country to another. The Commission says each partner needs to respect the accounting rules in its own country. So if your country says, for example, laboratory equipment is amortized over 10 years. That's what you need to use. If the project's running for 3 years, you say, well, 3 years of 10. Oh, but even then, that's not enough. You need to also think to yourself, well, even if I'm using this equipment for 3 years, am I going to utilize it 100% for this project? If the answer is no, if it's only 50%, that's a further factor you need to take into account in calculating what will be an eligible cost to claim for the project. Okay, the very last line in this slide says other goods, research consumables, bracket itemized. So yeah, if you've got research and innovation action, and you're buying, I don't know, chemicals, materials, electronics, whatever, make sure you give a nice, and you've triggered this 15%, the cost above 15% of the personnel cost. Make sure you give a nice kind of breakdown for those costs. Yeah. The other goods also encompasses works and services, e.g. catering. And something I know for these sort of twinning projects, these era chair projects, you're probably going to be hosting conferences, workshops. So the costs for entertaining, well, having a meal, catering at these events, those are eligible costs. Make sure you give an itemized budget for those. And this last when it says other cost categories, if there are any internally invoiced goods and services, then they need to complete table 3.1H from the standard application form. So sometimes with larger organizations, they do this sort of internal invoicing. One department charges for equipment or services from another. If that's the case, this is the table that you need to provide those details in. Okay. So look, that's rather a lot of words defining different types of cost categories. Let's go back for a moment to talk about lump sum funding versus reimbursement of actual costs. So with regard to lump sum funding, the European Commission has a very nice website where they explain all this. What you see here on the screen, this is the homepage for that part of the Commission's website where they explain about lump sum funding. The QR code, if you click on that, that will take you directly there. What's nice about this is the Commission's already created some training videos and training presentations. And very importantly, they also make available what's called the Excel budget tool. So the Excel budget tool is the tool that you have to use to show the details of your lump sum budget. So I recommend, if you're having to work on a proposal with lump sum funding, go to that website, review the video and presentations. Now, I have to say some more words a bit about this lump sum funding Excel budget tool of the Commission. So the QR code here on the top left, this should take you to where you can download the latest Excel file. And by the way, make sure you have the latest version, whichever proposal you're working on. Don't simply grab an Excel budget tool from a year ago, because chances are it's probably out of date. But this budget tool has a whole load of macros. Unfortunately, I'm not being able to sort of show all the different parts to it, but it has instructions. You're required with this Excel file to enter in the basic details about each of your consortium partners. And then yes, for each work package, for each partner, for each of the work packages they're involved in, you have to provide details of their budgets for personnel costs, equipment, travel, and so on and so forth. And once you've prepared it, and once it's all complete, you'll end up needing to upload this Excel file to the European Commission's portal as part of your proposal submission. Now, this is a piece of information that isn't so commonly advertised, if you like. It's very good to know. So from the Commission side, to help the people who evaluate your proposals, to help them when they're reviewing your budgets, your lump sum Excel funding budget, to help them with doing their review. The Commission has made publicly available information about typical person month rates for different types of expert, researcher, engineer, administrative staff, technical staff, so different types of expertise for different countries from the EU and beyond the EU. Now, the information that's provided is what is the sort of 20th, and this information has been gathered from past proposals over many, many years. The information that is made available is, what's the 20, for a particular type of category, let's say, senior researcher from, I don't know, Luxembourg, Lithuania, Albania, who knows. It will tell you what the 20th percentile of salary is for them, the 50th percentile, and the 80th percentile. So for the evaluators, it's a very useful tool to know, are the figures that are being quoted in this proposal, are they reasonable? In other words, are they somewhere between the 20th and 80th percentile, or if they're not, it's not for the evaluator to automatically go, oh, this is a bad budget. Because of course there are real cases where the real person month rates are higher or lower. No, the thing to be aware of is if you're writing proposals and you're developing your budget, if for one reason or another a consulting partner gives you person month rates that fall outside these 20th or 80th, then it's you should go back to them and say, please give some justification for that. And that justification, you can then actually also add in to your Excel budget tool. There's a section, there's a page right at the end where you can add extra comments, and you can add those explanations to justify why this particular salary was lower or higher than the standard range. Yeah, so it's something to be aware of. So when let's imagine you've done all this preparation of the lump sum funding budget and you've submitted it as part of a proposal, and amazingly you've been selected for funding. How does this sort of budget appear in your grant agreement, in your contract? Well, this is a real example. This is from a twinning project where we had rather a lot of work packages. I mean, what you see is you look along the top, there were quite a number of work packages which in effect we split in two. With these twinning projects, there's a period one which runs from month 1 to month 15, and there's a work package that goes from month 16 to month 36. So we decided, right or wrongly, to split some of those work packages in two according to 2 periods and calculate budgets. And this is basically what we had here for this particular twinning project. Cool Quest being run by ELTA in Hungary. Okay, before concluding, I should say some words here about, we talked about lump sum budgets. It's important to say some words about the older way of doing budgets, which to some extent still exists. So in other words, the reimbursement of actual costs. Now here, the Commission doesn't give a standard Excel file. They don't say, they don't give any particular advice. They don't give a particular file. What you're seeing here on the screen, this is an example from the sort of Excel file I would typically use. So I take a rather simplistic approach with these consortium-led proposals. If you look at this screenshot here, yes, at the bottom you see it says partner 1, partner 2, partner 3. however many partners you've got. For each partner, I would typically ask them to say, look, what's the average person month rate you're going to use? How many person months are each of the work packages? That would be for the personnel costs. For the other direct, and subcontracting, as you can see, is blank. If any partner puts some costs into subcontracting, I go back and I really scrutinize and say, are you sure? What is it you want to subcontract? And invariably, I usually find it can be recategorized as some sort of other direct cost. Then in the other direct costs, yeah, we list like the travel, depreciation for any durable equipment they want to buy, any consumables and so forth. And certainly for things like consumables, I ask them to give some kind of at least justification in terms of what it is they want to purchase. So anyway, that's a simple example there. How does that all look if you submit a proposal with a reimbursement of actual costs and it gets selected for funding? How does the budget look then in your grant agreement, your contract? Well, this is an example. This is from my Horizon Europe QRC for ESP project. So you see all the different partners on the left. You then see the budgets they have for these different cost categories like personnel costs, subcontracting costs, and so forth. So that's enough words about resource allocation. We're moving now on to the last few slides of this training. I need to say some words about proposal submission. So the actual act of submitting the proposal through the European Commission's funding and tenders portal. So I think the best way to try to explain this is by giving an imagining example. So you go to do your proposal submission, you go to the EU funding and tenders portal, you make sure you log in using your username and password. You then search for the particular call. You assume that it's actually open. It's not still classed as forthcoming. It is actually open, and the deadline hasn't passed. In this case, with this screen here, I know the date has already passed, the 10th of April 2025. But let's imagine you were applying for this call teaming for excellence. So if you're going to be the coordinator of the proposal, you would click on the hypertext link here. That would then take you to the specific page for that particular call on the EU funding and tenders portal. If you scroll down that page, you'd eventually get to a bit where there'll be a section where it says start submission. And eventually you'd find some buttons which says start submission. Now, obviously you need to click on that. That's the very first step you would need to do. But by no means would that be the last step. You're going to have to, and I don't show all the screens associated with it, but after you press that start submission button, you're then going to get asked to provide what's called the PIC number, the participant identification code for your organization, the coordinator. You're going to be asked to provide details of basic contact details, the name, email address, and access authorizations for different people in your organization. You'll also have to do that for the consulting partners that will be joining your proposal. So once you've done that, that's sort of the very first thing you need to do with your submission. Subsequent to that, yes, you'll have to enter the administrative data for the partners for Part A, or you grant all access rights so that their administrative staff can do that for themselves. Once you've completed the Part B, the technical description, you'll create a PDF that will be uploaded. You upload the budget data. So if it's a lump sum funded project, then you'll have to upload this Excel budget tool. Otherwise, if it's a reimbursement of actual costs, you'll find that within the Part A section on the online portal, there'll be a bit where you have to enter the budget breakdown for each partner, for each of their different cost categories. Assuming you've done all that, when you think you finally I've got everything complete. Don't forget to run the online proposal validation check. So there's a button you can press. Once that gives you the all clear, then you can press the submit button. Now, the thing to know about this is you can make multiple submissions. By that I mean you can continue making submissions right up until the deadline. So a good thing to do is to make sure you submit a version of your proposal, a version of the Part B, several days before the deadline. This to act as some kind of insurance policy. What you don't want to do is to have not done any submission, not press the submission, not press the submit button until literally like the last hour or hours before the deadline. The risk there is that these calls are often very heavily subscribed to, and there could well be thousands of different consortia submitting their proposals all at the same time. And as a consequence, you can have situations where the EU's funding and tenders portal is running rather slowly because of this excess activity. So don't leave the submitting of a proposal right to the very last minute. Make sure you submit a version some days beforehand, ideally. Of course, assuming you've done that, make further improvements, get your partners to do proofreading and checking of the Part B, maybe some slight refinements. As you're doing that, yes, you can resubmit an improved Part B. You can keep doing that right until the deadline, but don't leave the final version till like the last hour or two. It's just asking for potential trouble. Okay, assuming you've submitted, so what happens then? Once the deadline, the call is officially closed, it's usually at 5 o'clock Brussels time on whatever day of the week. The first thing the Commission does is they do an admissibility and eligibility check. So they check proposals to meet submission rules and eligibility criteria. These would be things like, do they have enough consortium partners from enough different eligible countries? Yeah, that would be a classic thing to check. Assuming your proposal passes all of those, it then goes out for expert review. So independent evaluators, which in fact could be fellow academics, for example, who have not submitted a proposal but have expertise in the area. Typically, 3 of the evaluators will be appointed for each proposal, and they'll assess the proposal based on 3 criteria. And these criteria tie up with the different sections of the Part B. So there'll be an assessment for excellence, assessment for impact, and assessment for implementation. And for the scoring, the evaluators will assign scores from 0 to 5 for each of those criteria. So a maximum score of 15 is achievable, yeah? Now, for each of those scoring criterion, there'll be a threshold. Typically, it's say 3 out of 5 for each of the criterion, and then say an overall score of about 10 out of 15 it's a threshold. This is the standard case, but there'll be plenty of exceptions where maybe the overall score has to be higher, or an individual criterion might need to be higher. Anyway, those are just the basic thresholds. So the evaluators do all their assessments, they do all their scoring, they do some kind of, together with the rapporteur, they'll come to have some kind of consensus meeting where they make sure their scores are basically all that there's not major deviations between their scores. They come to a consensus, and yeah, there's 2 things that go on here. One of the 3, they'll be appointed this rapporteur. That rapporteur will then will create what's called the evaluation summary report. So they'll extract not only the scores and synthesize all the scores from the evaluators, they'll also take some of the key qualitative comments from the different evaluators, and they'll put it into the evaluation summary report. This summary, these comments from the evaluators, they'll identify strengths and weaknesses that they've seen in the proposal. And typically this evaluation summary report will be about 2 to 4 pages in length. So that gets prepared, that gets sent out to, an evaluation summary report gets sent out to all the proposal coordinators, whether they've been successful or unsuccessful, they all receive that. In addition to that, though, of course, your proposal's got an overall score. All those proposals for the call, all those that have passed the scoring thresholds, they'll be put into a ranking list where at the top it's the highest scoring proposal, right the way down progressively until you get to the last proposal that meets the scoring thresholds. Now, the fact that you have a proposal that has meet all the scoring thresholds sadly doesn't mean to say it'll necessarily get funded. It all depends on how many proposals there are in this ranking list. And speaking honestly with you, the vast majority of time, it's simply not enough just to pass the threshold. You need to be really way up high. There's so much competition. You need to have a high score. Now, what does the score need to be? It all depends. I can only give very general, very general observations here. From my personal experience, I say it's very rare for a proposal to be funded where the excellence score is below 4.5 out of 5. There are cases, of course there are, but they're pretty rare. More likely they've got 4.5 or even 5 to ensure funding. Similarly, the overall score, there's not like one figure. I can't say it's 12, it's 13, but from general observation, I'm not often seeing proposals that get funded with scores below 13.5 out of 15. And quite often they need to be even higher, 14 or above to get funding. So in summary, it's tough, yeah? You have to have a very strong proposal, have a very good score, and also some luck, yeah? What's the timing for all this? So whatever your deadline was for submitting the proposal, you need to estimate with something like 4 to 5 months after that date before you get your evaluation summary report. So it's not a quick process. Imagine though you're one of the lucky ones. You wrote a perfect proposal, well, a very competitive proposal. You had a very good evaluation. You also had some luck. We all need it, and you've been selected for funding. So if that's the case, either immediate at the same time or literally within a matter of hours of receiving the evaluation summary report, project coordinators for proposals that are getting funded, they will get an additional email and letter where they're invited to prepare a grant agreement. If that's the case, fantastic, thumbs up, round of applause. And that's great because you're going to get funded, but in fact, the work is just starting in some respects, because you then entered into this what's called the grant agreement preparation process, and it can be quite taxing at times, this process. So during this process, you need to provide data, the grant agreement, things like you need to provide for the beneficiaries their legal, financial, and administrative details. More important, well, not more important, but very importantly, you'll probably be asked by the European Commission to do some sort of finalisation work on the work plan / budget. So even with very good proposals, with very good evaluations, there'll typically be some weaknesses that have been pointed out by the evaluators. If that's the case, don't be surprised if the Commission says during the grant agreement preparation process, they ask you to make some amendments to your Part B in order to address those weaknesses. And sometimes this can be quite painful and rather pedantic. And have to go through several iterations to finally get to the point where you have all the data, all the work plan completed satisfactorily for the European Commission authorities. So that's another thing you have to do. You have to prepare a consortium agreement. I'm going to talk about that on the very last slide coming up. Assuming you've done all those things, your grant agreement will go for financial and legal validation. So the European Commission verifies the eligibility, financial capacity, and legal status. The Commission will do an ethical and security review. If applicable, projects undergo ethics and security assessments. Once you've passed all that, you're then finally at the point for the signing of the grant agreement. So there'll be an electronic signature done by the appointed person for the project coordinator. They'll do this electronic signature via the funding and tenders portal. Once they've done it, the Commission will countersign it. Then if there are consortium partners for that particular project proposal, they will also have to do electronic signatures in order to accede to the grant agreement. What's the timing for this? Well, from when the coordinator receives this invitation to prepare the grant agreement to the actual completion of this process, typically it's of the order of 3 months. Sometimes it may be less, sometimes it may be more, but 3 months is a good rough estimate. And as I say, it can be quite arduous, it can be quite tough. So it's important to be, if you're involved in this grant agreement preparation, don't expect it to be a rapid, quick thing. Make sure your expectation is set to anticipate quite a lot of pedantic work that needs to be done. So very last slide, consortium agreement. What to say here? So that the purpose of a consortium agreement is to define internal collaboration rules, rights and responsibilities among consortium partners. It's mandatory for multi-beneficiary projects. So I've put it in red and underlined it. The Commission require, if you have a proposal, a project which involves the consortium partners, always the Commission will require that you have a consortium agreement, and not only that you have a consortium agreement amongst the partners, but that it's been prepared, concluded and signed before the grant agreement for the project is signed between the coordinator and the European Commission. That's what the Commission requires. Okay. So what are the key elements of the consortium agreement? Typically in a consortium agreement, you'll see stuff about the governance structure, financial management, intellectual property and data management, liability and conflict resolution, publication and dissemination rules. These will all be covered in the consortium agreement. Yeah, as I've said before, the Commission demand that the consortium agreement is signed before the grant agreement. Some pragmatic tips here. Don't try to invent this consortium agreement yourself from the start. It's all been done before, basically. There are established templates. The most well-known one is something called the DESCAR model. I've written here in red. Use the DESCAR model, it's freely available. The QR code in the bottom right, that will take you to the website where you can download this standard consortium agreement for use for your project. Even if you use this DESCAR model, it still needs to be negotiated with your partners. So make sure with your consortium you clarify financial and legal responsibilities early to avoid misunderstandings. Make sure all partners actively review and agree on terms of the consortium agreement before finalizing, according to deadlines. Yeah, so be careful. I think this the message a bit here. Consortium, the preparation of consortium agreements and getting them all signed off, it can also take months and months and months, and sometimes it does require the project coordinator or somebody responsible for the project to be active in facilitating these discussions and active in nudging various partners to finish their reviews, to send their comments and so forth. Yeah. Okay. Well, look, Took a fair bit of time, but that concludes then Module 2 about Horizon Europe project life cycle from respect of phases. First phase, the phase of initiation phase, and also the planning phase. In Module 3, which I'll be presenting to you in a separate video, I'll be going on to talk about the actual execution and control phase, in other words, the actual running of the projects, what you need to do, and also the closing phase. And for the time being, I'd like to thank you all, and I look forward to giving the final Module 3 training very shortly. All the best. Bye-bye.